The modern history of the British monarchy has always been written through official decrees, grand coronations, and public celebrations that project an image of absolute unity to the world. Yet, the true defining moments of the crown often occur behind tightly closed doors, far from the flashing cameras of the global press, in quiet rooms where words are weighed like gold and family bonds are tested against the unyielding demands of constitutional law. Recently, a profound shift occurred within the walls of Buckingham Palace, a moment that did not begin with a public announcement or a royal procession, but with a deeply personal question asked by a 9-year-old child. Prince George sat within the quiet confines of Adelaide Cottage, looking at his father, Prince Wales, and asking a simple yet heartbreaking question about whether he had done something wrong to cause a sudden rift in the family. This single, poignant moment captures the true emotional weight of a crisis that has quietly reshaped the future of the House of Windsor. It was not merely a matter of legal texts or palace politics. It was a situation where the adults in the royal household had allowed internal ambitions to grow so complex that a young boy felt the burden of their choices before the king finally intervened to draw a definitive line in the sand. To understand how the royal family reached this point of internal crisis, one must look closely at a highly confidential and sealed meeting held at Buckingham Palace. It was during this private gathering that King Charles executed a binding legal declaration that officially named Prince George as the direct dynastic heir, establishing unprecedented structural protections around his future preparation. However, the most shocking aspect of this document was not what it gave to George, but what it explicitly took away from others. The declaration specifically and permanently removed Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, Queen Camilla's children from her first marriage, from every internal succession provision, emergency regency consideration, inheritance expectation, and institutional continuity plan tied directly to the British crown. On the surface, this might seem entirely redundant. Everyone in the United Kingdom and across the Commonwealth knows that Tom and Laura have absolutely no legal claim to the throne, as they are not of the royal bloodline. Therefore, the critical question that sent shockwaves through the palace was not why they were excluded from a succession line they were never part of, but rather why their names had to be written into a formal, binding royal decree in the first place. If there was no underlying threat, no hidden ambition, and no internal dispute, there would be absolutely no reason for a legal document to explicitly state that the Queen's adult children cannot under any circumstances hold delegated authority over royal estates, secret archives, or ceremonial duties connected to a minor heir. This was not a routine clarification. It was a direct and powerful response to a specific sequence of events that had occurred behind the scenes. The tension became palpable when Prince William first read the opening paragraph of this new declaration. He looked at the empty chair where his son usually sat and asked the assembled officials whether George had been informed about the sudden legal maneuverings. The heavy silence that followed his question spoke volumes. It revealed that either the young prince was being shielded from a deeply uncomfortable family reality, or the entire process was moving so rapidly and secretly that even the future king had not been fully briefed on what his own son had been told. The entire timeline had been aggressively fast-tracked by King Charles himself, who firmly rejected Queen Camilla's urgent request to delay the publication of the document for 24 hours. The king's blunt statement that the delay had already lasted far too long made it clear that this was not standard constitutional housekeeping. It was the decisive action of a monarch who realized that a dangerous problem had been allowed to sit, fester, and grow within his own household, and that it now required immediate surgical removal before it could inflict permanent damage on the institution of the monarchy. The true catalyst for this unprecedented declaration can be traced back several months to a private briefing held at Windsor Castle. This meeting was originally intended for routine continuity planning, which outlines the emergency procedures if both the King and the Prince of Wales were to become temporarily unavailable or incapacitated. During this meeting, a seemingly innocent proposal was quietly placed in front of Prince William. The document suggested that Tom Parker Bowles be officially listed as a family liaison, a role that would grant him direct access to high-level household discussions involving Prince George in the event of a national crisis where Charles and William were absent. Queen Camilla defended the proposal by arguing that she was merely attempting to build a trusted, protective circle around the young prince during an uncertain time, rather than reaching for institutional power. She emphasized that Tom's absolute discretion, life experience, and deep loyalty to King Charles would provide essential stability for the boy if a tragedy ever occurred. However, Prince William has spent his entire life learning to look past the gentle language of palace proposals and examine the legal reality hidden beneath the paperwork. He closed the folder before the official could even finish reading the brief, and directly asked his father if he had personally authorized Tom's inclusion in the Crown's emergency structures. While Camilla maintained that the concept was purely practical and entirely non-political, Kate Middleton turned the page of the draft and discovered the true, alarming extent of the requested powers. The text explicitly granted the proposed family liaison direct access to Prince George's official schedule, his private correspondence, and the long-term institutional planning of his household. This was not a casual role designed for emotional family support. It was a highly detailed, legally binding blueprint for institutional access to the future King of England. Kate immediately recognized the profound danger of the document, noting that the phrasing was far too precise and professional to have originated from a simple, well-intentioned family conversation. When she asked exactly who had drafted these specific clauses, a profound silence enveloped the room, exposing the deep fractures within the palace walls. Although Queen Camilla insisted that she had never requested such broad administrative powers for her son, the pages were already there, formally printed and positioned for a signature, revealing that someone within her inner circle was actively working to reshape the boundaries of royal influence. Following the intense confrontation inside the private rooms of Windsor Castle, the hidden fractures within the royal family quickly escalated from an internal disagreement into a profound institutional crisis. Prince William, determined to protect the future of his eldest son, refused to let the momentum of the discovery fade into standard palace compromises. He discovered shortly after the initial briefing that the calculated proposal to insert Tom Parker Bowles into George's emergency structures had actually been discussed on 2 separate occasions with high-ranking royal estate officials before it was ever presented to him. This realization changed everything for the Prince of Wales, as it proved that the plan was not a spontaneous suggestion born out of maternal care, but a coordinated administrative effort that had traveled significantly through private offices. What cut deepest was the discovery that while King Charles had never officially signed or approved the memorandum, he had also not immediately halted the internal discussions when they first crossed his desk weeks earlier. To William, his father's initial passivity was almost as damaging as the proposal itself, representing a dangerous willingness to let the boundaries around the direct line of succession blur. Kate Middleton meticulously documented the exact dates and the specific legal terminology used in the drafts, warning her husband that the true crisis was no longer about Camilla's personal intentions, but the fact that the palace machinery had begun treating Prince George's future as something subject to negotiation. The necessity for absolute clarity led to an unprecedented, unscripted meeting where Prince William confronted both King Charles and Queen Camilla simultaneously. There were no private secretaries, no constitutional lawyers, and no dynamic media advisors present in the room to soften the blow. William, maintaining a chillingly calm demeanor, pulled an unused wooden chair away from the table, placed the original Windsor proposal directly in front of Camilla, and demanded to know who among them believed they possessed the right to organize institutional access to his son without his explicit consent. The sheer weight of the question left the monarch and the queen consort staring in stunned silence. To solidify his position, William then produced 2 dated internal memoranda showing that the draft had been quietly circulated between private offices for nearly a month, accompanied by a handwritten instruction ordering staff to bypass the Constitutional Secretariat completely. This specific detail was the ultimate evidence of administrative overreach, because the Constitutional Secretariat is the precise team responsible for ensuring that all palace choices strictly align with historical rules and legal frameworks. You do not intentionally hide a document from the official legal checkers unless you are fully aware that the proposal would never survive a rigorous constitutional assessment. As Camilla leaned closer to inspect the document, her face grew pale as she recognized the handwriting of a highly trusted senior member of her own personal household staff. The revelation that an official within the Queen's orbit had independently taken her casual ideas and expanded them into a sweeping draft for institutional authority sent shockwaves through the immediate family. Even though Camilla's shock appeared entirely genuine, and she repeatedly insisted that she had never authorized her staff to draft such expansive demands, the institutional reality remained dangerous. It proved that an environment had been allowed to develop where staff members felt confident enough to subtly manipulate gray areas in the royal hierarchy. Witnessing the undeniable breakdown of boundaries, King Charles took immediate control of the situation. In a moment of absolute sovereign authority, the king reached across the table, tore the Windsor proposal completely in half, and announced that a legally binding, unalterable declaration would be drafted overnight to permanently replace every informal family understanding. When a visibly shaken Camilla asked whether her adult children would be explicitly named in the official document, Charles delivered a devastating reply, stating that because ambiguity had created this internal danger, all ambiguity would now be permanently erased from the monarchy. The king was not accusing Tom or Laura of personal misconduct. He was acknowledging that the lack of hard legal boundaries had allowed ambitious actors to exploit the family structure, and the only way to safeguard the throne was to issue a definitive decree that left no room for creative interpretation. King Charles immediately summoned a senior constitutional counselor to his private study, ordering him to work through the night to systematically eliminate any possible pathway by which informal family influence could touch the future sovereign. The legal expert conducted an exhaustive audit of every dormant palace memorandum, focusing heavily on emergency advisory roles, guardianship consultations, privileged archive access, and inherited ceremonial expectations. Each of these components might have appeared entirely harmless when viewed in isolation, but when combined, they formed a highly sophisticated web of access that could give Queen Camilla's children an unspoken institutional standing they did not legally possess. The danger was not an immediate coup, but the slow, generational accumulation of influence around a young, vulnerable heir before anyone officially recognized what was happening. When the king inquired whether the names of Tom and Laura could be left out of the public text to protect the family from immense public scrutiny, the counselor provided a firm negative response. He explained to the monarch that unnamed restrictions could easily be softened, reinterpreted, or quietly ignored by future administrations, whereas named exclusions left absolutely no legal space for manipulation. Understanding that his own initial hesitation had allowed this crisis to grow, King Charles courageously chose the harder public path, personally authorizing the explicit wording to ensure the crown remained completely protected. The situation grew even more complex when the constitutional counselor uncovered a completely separate, forgotten estate document from months prior that proposed a permanent consultative role for Laura Lopes at a prominent royal property following the king's eventual passing. Although this particular document had never been executed, its mere existence in the palace archives shattered the narrative that the Windsor proposal was an isolated incident by a single rogue staffer. It was undeniable proof that informal expectations had traveled much further through the palace corridors than anyone had willingly confessed. Princess and brought in at her brother's request to review the final structure of the new declaration, provided the blunt and accurate assessment that defined the true nature of the crown. She looked directly at King Charles and stated that the monarchy could not survive if it attempted to maintain two conflicting definitions of family, one based on personal affection and another activated whenever power and institutional authority became available. Anne's unwavering loyalty to the integrity of the direct line solidified the king's resolve, and by dawn, the declaration was finalized and locked away, securing Prince George's path through the lawful line descending exclusively from Charles and William, while the outer branches of the family tree prepared to face the immediate, cold reality of official exclusion. As the morning sun began to light up the stone walls of Buckingham Palace, the consequences of the newly signed royal declaration moved swiftly from the locked offices of constitutional experts into the functional reality of daily palace life. The official document was secure, but beyond the heavily guarded doors, Private phone lines were already buzzing with tension as staff members and extended families scrambled to understand the sudden shift in power. The reality of official exclusion hit Queen Camilla's children with a cold, administrative precision that allowed no room for gradual adjustment. Within hours, invitations to highly exclusive royal functions were quietly pulled back, planned high-level estate briefings were cancelled without explanation, and 2 key security clearances were lowered to standard civilian status. Tom Parker Bowles received a direct phone call from a senior palace official curtly informing him that an upcoming gathering centered around Prince George's future education would now proceed entirely without his attendance. He quietly thanked the caller, gently placed the telephone back onto his wooden desk, and sat completely motionless for a long time. The palace issued a controlled internal guidance explaining that these adjustments were strictly intended to separate personal affection from official institutional power, meaning that while Charles and Camilla could still invite her children to private dinners and birthdays, no relationship could ever again be leveraged to claim a position within the state. Tom opened a faded photograph taken with his mother many years before her royal marriage, a wave of intense frustration tightening his face before giving way to a profound sadness as he realized that Camilla's rise to the top had brought him just close enough to the crown to be publicly cast aside from it. The emotional impact of the declaration was handled very differently by Laura Lopes, who during a recorded phone call with her mother explicitly requested that there be no public campaign, no official media correction, and no backdoor attempt to recover the lost access privileges. Her controlled, quiet voice carried a weight of deep pain rather than fiery outrage, signaling that she was choosing to retreat from the overwhelming royal environment altogether rather than fight an institution that viewed her presence as a potential constitutional complication. Camilla heard this growing emotional distance over the phone line and realized with a heavy heart that her daughter was pulling away not out of immediate anger, but because she was simply done dealing with the exhausting demands of the monarchy. The internal crisis threatened to spill out into a national scandal when a partial text copy of the highly restricted declaration leaked to a major national broadcaster. Within minutes, sensational headlines screamed across television screens that Prince George had been named the direct heir, a phrasing that dangerously and falsely suggested that Prince William himself had been pushed out of the lineage. William understood instantly that if this public confusion outside the palace walls was allowed to deepen, it would permanently poison the fragile family dynamic inside the household. He immediately arranged a highly unusual, completely private meeting with Camilla alone, ensuring that no advisors, secretaries, or lawyers were present to influence the conversation. Sitting directly opposite his stepmother in the quiet room, Prince William stated clearly that he had not come to demand an apology, but to ensure that George would not inherit a family permanently fractured by decisions made during his childhood. Camilla, visibly exhausted by the immense pressure, admitted that years of being treated as an unwelcome intruder by the British public had changed her defensive instincts, making her fiercely determined that Tom and Laura would never be made to feel invisible beside the royal family. She confessed that in her intense desire to secure a basic level of dignity for her biological children, she had completely failed to realize how the detailed language of the liaison proposal directly threatened the constitutional authority of William and Kate. In a highly symbolic move to show her commitment to the family's future peace, Camilla retrieved the original Windsor memorandum from her desk drawer, pulled out the handwritten page containing her initial ideas, and tore it into small pieces in front of the Prince of Wales, promising that no member of her household would ever again be put forward for any administrative role involving George. William responded by setting a firm but fair boundary of his own, assuring her that Tom and Laura would never be erased from private family events and that he would personally halt any unnecessary social exclusions from birthdays or private gatherings, provided that George's future remained completely insulated from emotional and institutional pressure. The public resolution of the crisis required one final, united front before the global media. Camilla requested only that William state publicly that her children had never actively sought the throne or attempted to usurp a regency, a request that William honored by standing firmly beside King Charles during a comprehensive official briefing that afternoon. The king delivered a powerful clarification himself, confirming to the gathered press corps that William's position as the next immediate heir remained completely unchanged, and that the declaration existed solely to prevent private personal relationships from transforming into alternative centers of unchecked royal influence. From her residence in Windsor, Kate Middleton watched the broadcast beside her son, turning down the television volume when commentators began speaking of George as a distant national institution rather than a young child. Sensing his mother's underlying tension, George looked up and asked if the large crowds gathering outside the palace gates were angry with him. Kate gently reassured him that the public was simply reacting to complex adult decisions and that he carried absolutely no blame for the media storm. That evening, as William placed a reassuring, steadying hand on George's shoulder on their way to a private chapel service, the single gesture became a powerful symbol of a father shielding his son from the immense weight of his destiny. The signed declaration now rests permanently inside the royal archives, beyond the reach of private persuasion, serving as the crown's final, unyielding statement that while love may shape the boundaries of a modern family, only law, duty, and the direct line of succession may ever shape the future of the British throne.